Hey, what is up, everyone? Welcome to our 30 Days of Death Shadow wrap up. If you're finding this video, I have just completed playing 30 days straight of Death Shadow League and uploading it to YouTube. It was a really, really fun project, and it's pretty crazy and exciting to already be here, which is having finished already with this project. And yeah, we're just going to go over a couple of things. I'm going to make a short little wrap up video, just kind of go over some data, some lessons learned, stuff like that. Just kind of put a bow on and summarizing this 30-day challenge that we did. So the first thing that we're going to look at for the challenge here is going to look at some of the data, some of the win rates specifically. So for y'all who have been following me, a lot of these numbers shouldn't be a huge surprise. But I have ordered the our worst win rates on the left, and then getting better as we go to the right. And then highlighted in gold here are the different 5-0s that we got throughout our 30-day challenge. So as we see on the very far left, really unfortunate Grixis Death Shadow getting the 40% win rate, which is a pretty rough, not going to lie, pretty rough win rate for Grixis Shadow. But like I said, for y'all that have been watching me, you know that a lot of struggles that I had with Grixis Shadow. I've talked with some other people who play lots of different Shadow decks, and they seem to have reported similar, not as bad obviously as 40% win rate, but certainly have reported Grixis seeing kind of the worst win rate out of all of the decks that we have here. So we have 40% for that when we went 12 and 18 in our matches. Next after that is our memes, and the memes were the different off-meta decks, or the, not off-meta, but the kind of other category of shadow decks that we would do every 5 days or every 5th day. And as we can see, we did okay on that one. We went 17 and 13, which gave us a 57% win rate. We were able to snatch a single 4-1 in all of our leagues, but otherwise we hovered around 3 2s and 2 3s. Stepping up after that, we had our 4-color Death Shadow, and 4-color Death Shadow improved just a couple percentage points. We actually just won only a single match more, and getting us a 60% win rate. We went 18 and 12, and we also were able to nab a trophy playing a 4-color Shadow list. And I guess this also makes a little bit of sense to me. It feels that, to me, the positioning of Stubborn Denial is, not quite as well as it has been in the past. And we're going to kind of get into some of those reasons in a little bit here. But yeah, that one was our kind of middle of the road one. After that was our Red-Black Shadow deck, which we went 20 and 10 to give us a 67% win rate. Now we're kind of entering the win rate percentage that is definitely something, in my opinion, at least for me personally, to be proud of. And this, 67% win rate, has a lot to do with our last 3 leagues. You can see we went 5-0, 5-0, and then 3-2. And those last 3 leagues were all the same, with the same exact list. And in fact, if it wasn't for that kind of really rough league there that 1-4, this may have even been our highest performing Shadow variant. So it was pretty close. This one going 20 and 10, a pretty solid record. And then we finally get to Jund Death Shadow, which, frankly, we just kind of killed it with Jund Death Shadow. We got a 73% win rate. We went 22 and 8, which is really, really great numbers for me, and kind of an incredible run of 4-1s. It just seemed like we couldn't not 4-1, and 3-2s beginning and ending it. And so that's also for me something to really be proud of with our Jund Death Shadow list. Also, I'm especially proud that a lot of those 4-1s came with the kind of like weird Traverse Street Wraith Bauble versions that I like to play a lot. This gave us an overall total record of 89 and 61, giving us a 59% win rate. And of course, as you guys can see, if we were to cut out Grixis Death Shadow and memes from this, we would have a pretty impressive win rate percentage. So definitely some interesting data to look over here. But yeah, I'm certainly very proud of the data that we were able to get. And even for a low win rate in Grixis Death Shadow, I actually think that having played through all those leagues with Grixis Shadow, although in the moment a lot of them got me pretty upset, I actually think I grew and learned the most from playing Grixis Death Shadow, because it is, in my opinion, the hardest deck to pilot out of all of the decks that we were able to play. Moving on, we're going to break down by matchups. And this was really fun to kind of delve into and look at because for this one, I really had no idea what the data was going to end up looking like. And some of these things are not a surprise, and some of these things are a little bit maybe more of a surprise. And this data comes from all of our decks combined. We didn't break this one up by archetype that I was playing because if we were to say break down each matchup with Jund, each matchup with Grixis, I think frankly we just would not have a big enough sample size to really confidently put any win percentages next to any of them. So as you may have already looked through, we're going to start at the top here. Both Storm and Hammer Time, I 4-0'd both, so we had our perfect 100% win rate against Storm and Hammer Time. For anyone who's played those decks or played Shadow decks against them, I guess this is not too much of a surprise. That being said, both of these decks have really gotten me in the past. Have really like cheesed out wins, or just not even cheesed, but just gotten me. Just won, just just totally won just as through the normal course of the game and their game plan here. So anyway, funny that we got the 100% there against Storm and Hammer Time, but of course, I think most people will say those are matchups that Shadow wants to see. Number 2 here, we are looking at tribal decks. We went 10-2 against tribal decks, which might be a little bit of a surprise. I'm not sure. I think this number here, honestly, I think it says less about us and Shadow, and I think it says more just about tribal decks in general. So if you really think about what have our decks, as in, black-based mid-range and Shadow decks gotten in the past couple years versus what tribal decks have gotten, and I just don't really think it's quite the same. And honestly, I think those 2 losses are really from Grixis Shadow, which, Grixis Shadow has classically had bad matchups against tribal decks, but the rest of them, our Jund Shadow and our Rakdos Shadow and our 4-color Shadow, I think actually do really, really well against tribal decks. The existence of Luris, sometimes we're playing Seal of Fire, playing a lot of Lightning Bolts, aggressive threats that they have a hard time dealing with. And so again, I think we've gotten a lot of tools to make our deck more powerful, and unfortunately for the humans and the merfolk of the world, I think it's a lot harder. Now I think one deck that has seen a big boost is Spirits. However, I think with Spirits that's mostly due to the fact that they got the card Skyclave Apparition. So anyway, still an interesting number, the 10-2 against tribal decks. Not always a deck you say that Death Shadow does well against, but certainly the new Jund Death Shadow and the Rakdos Shadow do pretty well. We went 10-3 against black-based mid-range, giving us a 77% win rate against black-based mid-range. That one's interesting as well. All of my background in Modern is in black-based mid-range. It's basically all that I play outside of Shadow. I have played Jund and Green-Black Rock for a number of years now, and I've messed around with a lot of different, Rakdos mid-range, Dead Guy Ale, things like that, Mardu mid-range. And I'm wondering if that played an element there. It may have. This is also an interesting number because I know myself and I know a lot of other black-based mid-range players, and they'll tend to say that they have really good Shadow matchups. And I think, honestly, just the existence of Luris and the existence of really potent threats and like Scourge of the Skyclaves has made the matchup much, much harder. A lot of our games played out like this. They played out, our opponent had some removal spells and answers, and we were able just to keep slamming threat after threat after threat until finally, the black-based mid-range player will run out of answers eventually. And if they're not doing something really proactive to fight back, then I think they just kind of eventually just give, and then the last creature to cross the finish line usually kills them, whether it be a Shadow or a Scourge of the Skyclaves. So definitely an interesting number here to get 77% against the black-based mid-range decks. Next one down, we have our Prowess matchups, which we went 11-4 in. We got 73% against Prowess. Also a number that I was not expecting, and I was, frankly really impressed by that we were able to do that. And I think this says a lot about the power of specifically Death Shadow and Temur Battle Rage. As we're going to see here, actually we're going to see a couple clips of it here later on in the slides, but there were so many games that we kind of honestly just stole away from the Prowess decks because of the card Temur Battle Rage. I think it's a card they have an extraordinarily hard time dealing with, and it kind of breaks any and all like advantages that they have. Now, the Is It Prowess decks play things like Vapor Snag to help with that. You know, they can Vapor Snag a threat in response to the team or Battle Rage, and I do think that's a huge help. And that actually killed us many of the times. We'd play a huge threat and they'd Vapor Snag it out of the way and kill us. Um, However, it still remains that our ability to weather a huge amount of damage, and as long as we don't die and we untap with a Battle Rage and a Shadow, we almost always win those games. And I think that data really represents that. Okay, clocking it at a 7-5 record at 58%, we have Amulet Titan. And Amulet Titan, honestly, since the banning of Field of the Dead, Amulet Titan for me has become like my formidable opponent. The deck that I think is amazingly fun to play against, and I think is a mighty worthy opponent of our deck. And especially when playing against a really talented Amulet player, which you can tell when you're playing the leagues and you play against enough Amulet matches, you can tell the players that are very experienced and the players that are more starting out in the archetype. And I really have this like just deep and huge respect for the Amulet deck. And I think our matchup to me is like this epic celestial battle, you know, like the two epic forces of Death Shadow and Amulet duking it out for supremacy of the modern metagame. I really do think Amulet is a really cool deck, a really sweet deck, a deck to be respected, but also a deck to have a lot of fun when playing against. And some of the best, most, you know, impactful games for me where I learned the most were against the Amulet deck. All right, moving on. This was the funniest data point for me. The fact that we went 4-4 in the mirror to give us a perfect 50% in the mirror, which, like, I guess the statistician and anyone should make them smile because it's pretty funny that we went dead even in the mirror, like you're statistically expected to do so. So I thought that was really funny. We went 3-4 against Burn. This to me makes a lot of sense. You know, whereas the Prowess deck, we can interact with creatures really well. We play a lot of removal spells, and we can maneuver ourselves into a place where we can effectively go, you know, Shadow Battle Rage to kill them. Burn, a lot of the times, don't afford you that luxury. And when you don't have the card Stubborn Denial, it makes it really, really difficult to interact with Burn when they just go, you know, burn spell, we untap, we have to lower life for our Shadow, and they untap and just go burn spell, and just kill us and finish us off. So I think Burn is continuing to be, for me, a really big challenge, a deck that I'm, you know, struggling to beat. I guess 3-4 is still not the worst record, of course, but I think a lot of those wins came from decks where we were playing Stubborn Denial. All right, lower down the list at a 6-8 record at 43% is blue-based Control. This should be no surprise to anyone who's ever played a Death Shadow deck. The blue Control decks really give us a hard time. Cards like Teferi Time Raveler, Path to Exile, which doesn't care about Gurmag Angler, and Supreme Verdict, which doesn't care about counter magic. We should all know what a hassle and how difficult it can be to play against blue-based Control. Most especially the Esper Control list that's just popped up, and that is TSP Gendrix Modern Challenge winning Esper deck. Seemed almost exclusively tuned to beat up on the Death Shadow decks. And so at a 6-8 record and 43%, I'm not at all surprised to see us, losing to blue-based Control. Next, we have at 3-5, we have the Tron matchup at 38% win record. Again, to anyone who's ever played a Shadow deck where you don't have access to Stubborn Denial, you should know how difficult and how much trouble the Tron matchup can really give you. Honestly, and this is maybe a really hot take, but from my experience playing Boomerjund, I honestly feel more confident on Boomerjund versus Tron than I do on Death Shadow. And I know that's probably a really hot take. A lot of people are going to disagree with that. But I do think that when I'm playing Boomerjund, I have access to a lot more relevant interaction, and interaction that can effectively buy us enough time against Tron. Because I find that even the fastest clock from Death Shadow can't beat a progression from Tron that goes something like turn 3 Karn, either one, and turn 4 Ugin or turn 4 Ulamog, which happens a lot, especially when you're on the draw. And so Tron just giving us a hard time here at 3-5 at 38%, especially the Jund Death Shadow variant, really struggling to interact with and be able to beat the Tron progressions. And then at the very bottom, this should be no surprise to anyone. It's why it's the best deck in the format, most likely right now. But we went 2-5 against Heliod. Give a 28% record against Heliod. Let me tell you, man. Ariok Champion, Infinite Life combo, Collected Company, 2-for-1 with Ranger Captain of Eos, the Ballista off the top cheese kills. Man, it is a perfect storm bad matchup for Death Shadow. Skyclave Apparition, just a absolute back-breaking card for Death Shadow. Man, it is no surprise we went 2-5 off Heliod. In fact, the 2 wins I am super proud of. That we got 2 wins off of Heliod because, man, oh man, did they just absolutely pummel us with no matter what version of Shadow you seem to be playing, that Heliod matchup's going to get you. And it's funny because I see a lot of decks that are packing things like 3 to Glamour in the sideboard. Okay, great. You can answer the Heliod, but are you answering the Ariok Champions and the Skyclave Apparitions that are taking your 1 mana 10/10 into a 1 mana 1/1? It really should be no surprise that we see that 28% there at Heliod. And again, another matchup where I really feel way more confident. Honestly, maybe hot take, but I personally feel way more confident on Boomer Jund because we have access to things like Liliana the Veil, Renin 6, Kolaghan's Command. Well, the Shadow decks have Kolaghan's Command too, but we really get to really leverage that more consistently with having more lands and more consistent land drops on Boomer Jund. But anyway, fun stuff. It was really funny for me to put together these win percentage breakdowns, and it seems really illuminating for me what we ended up doing really well against and what we really struggled against. All right, which kind of brings us to this question of like, through this challenge, I was constantly asking myself, like, what are the strengths of each of these deck archetypes, and like which one seems suited for what kind of meta. And I don't think this is going to be groundbreaking information for anyone, but how I felt was that definitely for Grixis Death Shadow, combo and burn are the big ones that I think we're going to really want to see if we're on Grixis, because those are decks where we really get to leverage, first of all, probably the least painful mana base, or the potentially least painful mana base out of all of ours, and also the card Stubborn Denial. You're playing against Burn, for instance. There's a lot of Grixis Death Shadow hands that function just fine off of a basic swamp and a basic island. Hey, grab that red source at the very end to Team or Battle Rage your threat, but as long as you have some huge threat and stub held up, I think you're doing just fine. And it's funny how a lot of times I notice Grixis has a weird way to operate off of one land, almost better than almost any other deck that we had, Death Shadow deck we had. All right, now we're looking at the Jund Death Shadow list. Really felt to succeed and really do well against the fair mid-range decks. The creature-based decks, especially when those creature-based decks included like the prowess decks that had Lightning Bolt because of Tarmogoyf, and then also the pro-black threats, again because of Tarmogoyf being a green threat, or we played Hexdrinker sometimes, also getting around the pro-black threats. I think this is kind of honestly, the format we see ourselves in right now for the most part, which is fair mid-range, creature-based, and pro-black threats. And so it should be no surprise we see Jund doing pretty well right now of all of them. For Rakdos, it really felt like Rakdos did really well against the control decks because of the card Bomat Courier being such a kind of obnoxious threat for the control decks to have to deal with. They don't have blockers in the way to block it. It's not the best thing for them to have to point a removal spell at. And if it goes unanswered for a couple turns, it's Ancestral Recall or even better sometimes. I do like 5 cards off of some Bomat Couriers at times. And then also Rakdos has going for it is that it's a great deck that can leverage Blood Moon in a Death Shadow deck. Normally, Blood Moon is a huge pain, a huge thorn in the side of any Shadow deck, but Rakdos Shadow gets to use Blood Moon to its advantage. And then, of course, also, I didn't write this down, but Rakdos being the best, no doubt about it, the best Scourge of the Skyclaves deck out of all of our Shadow variants. Has the most haste threats, has the most ability to just lower our opponent's life total, play a Scourge, and then untap and win. And then it brings us to 4-color Shadow. I'm not sure, actually. 4-color Shadow is one of those deck archetypes that I love, and I think I have a really fun time playing it, and it's really cool. But it's just this, like, 4-color Shadow is this weird hedge. It's this weird blend of all the different Shadow varieties. And so, yeah, it like has the aggressive kind of Jund Shadow plays of hand disruption into threat, It also gets to play Stubborn Denials, and sometimes it plays Delay in the sideboard, or it plays, like we did in our main deck, we played the Royal Scions. So 4-color is kind of all over the place. I think 4-color might just be the most generically good, like just the highest floor deck of all the Shadow decks. The one that you're just like, this is just a fairly consistent deck, and it kind of gets to do it all, and so we kind of maybe get to leverage our play skill with 4-color. I'm not sure. If you have strong feelings about what decks or what meta you'd want 4-color Shadow for, let me know in the comments. All right. That brings us to some of the biggest lessons I learned by going through this challenge. Honestly, y'all, this 30-day challenge I would recommend to anyone. It was an amazing way to keep me held accountable and keep me just grinding every single day. Before, I really wanted to play a lot, but I kind of would make excuses for myself. I would say, oh no, I'm tired tonight, or I don't really feel like playing Magic. I'm just going to go to bed, or oh, I'm too busy. I don't want to play. This project was such an amazing way to hold myself accountable. And while I am super appreciative of everyone that has come to watch my videos and who has commented, and everyone else, the support has been amazing so far. But honestly, y'all, just to be honest with you guys, this was all for me. This was all just for me to have a public area where people knew this project I was doing, and so therefore I was held accountable to keep going and keep pushing through and finish. And that was such a huge help to me. And honestly, with all of that, just the learning the grit, just the perseverance, and just in general, just the overall writing theme, the biggest thing I can think of to encapsulate what I've learned through this challenge is just the idea that I should never give up. Never give up to continue grinding leagues, never give up in the middle of games, and never give up even when I'm feeling like I'm really upset or I want to give up. So I really want to take a time to read out this tweet that I think is really, really cool. So it comes from Will Kruger. He's at Will_Kruger on Twitter. His MTGO handle, you might know him by the name X-Whale, an extremely talented player and a player that I really admire his attitude and his outlook on the game. And Magic Esports put out a tweet and it said, what piece of advice has helped you level up your game the most? And Will Kruger said, it is so important to internalize that results are close to meaningless as far as how good you are goes. And I think when he says it's, I think he means Magic. Magic is also really, really hard. At Kane Reinhardt is really big on this mindset and pushes it a lot, which has helped me a ton. I can't agree with that more. It is so important to internalize that your results will be good or bad. This is a game of variance. We're playing a card game, so you're going to catch the hot shuffler, and sometimes you're not. So you just kind of got to keep pushing through it, and really what your focus needs to be is on your mental game. And so let's get into that a little bit. So the number one thing for me when going through this challenge was the improvement in my mental game. And obviously, I still have a long way to go. You guys saw in my very last video, I kind of tilted off over my opponent's slow play. But I do really have felt a huge improvement in my mental game. I think for a long time, I would be playing Moto or playing on MTGO, and I don't know what it was. On paper, I was usually good, but on MTGO, it would really get to me. And just the top deck or my misplay or something, and I would just get so pissed. And when I got pissed, I couldn't focus. I just saw red, and I just couldn't even get my mind in the right mental place. And honestly, going through this, playing every single day, having gotten feedback from the videos, having continued to push myself to keep going through the leagues, even when I was 0-4, just to queue up into the last round to complete the league for the challenge, I really have felt such an immense level up in my mental game. I feel like I'm sweating off top decks a lot easier. Honestly, just doing this challenge has made me jump into a league and just not care. Well, I do care, of course. I get upset and I want to change. I want to do better. But I think the biggest thing for me is trying to at least get into myself thinking I should not care if I 0-5 this league. If I 0-3 drop this league, who cares? I just queue up for another one. It means so little in the broader scheme of my Magic career if I just scrub out, even if it were to happen for a week in a row, I were to scrub out in a bunch of leagues and I just not do good. Who cares, right? Either it's variance or my skill. Either one I can work. Well, I can't work on the variance part. I can work on the skill for sure. I can work on my mental reaction to the variance for sure. And so really that improving that mental game to never give up, just to kind of just have a mindset of just let's just keep jamming, keep going, has been so helpful for me. All right, this leads into never giving up when it comes to the actual gameplay itself, inside the gameplay. And I think the biggest thing I was taught about the Shadow archetype through this challenge is that, like, literally the existence of Temur Battle Rage in your deck just literally means that there is some percentage chance that you could always win. No matter how remote that percentage chance seems, there is some percentage chance that you can still win a game. And I didn't believe it, but it kept happening in games. We stole so many games just because of a top deck Temur Battle Rage. It was wild. Okay. And that kind of leads me to my next point here. And this is so important, especially when playing on MTGO. But literally, unless you're deterministically dead. So that means like your I don't know. I even believed auto scooping to your Heliod opponents gaining infinite life, especially when you're playing Death Shadow. But let's say you're on a devoted Druid deck and they're just clicking through the mana for their Walking Ballista. Yeah, concede there. That's a waste of everyone's time. Plus, I think it's like good practice to concede to your opponents in those kind of spots. But literally, unless you are deterministically dead on the spot, okay, do not concede. All right, and so let's take a look at some of those examples because they came up a lot in the leagues. It was pretty fun. Okay, this looks like a spot where we die. This comes from day 25. This was our Esper Red deck. This is where we took Grixis Shadow and then just stuffed the Fairy Time Ravelers in it. It was really fun. But let's go ahead and just take a peek at how this game has progressed so far. So especially important to look at our opponent's graveyard here. We can see the cards that we have fought through and what they have top decked in spite of us fighting through. So let's just take a peek. I want to call out here that we fought through one Sprite Dragon, 2 Stormwing entities. You can see those 2 Stormwing entities right there. We have fought through a Light Up the Stage, many burn spells, so multiple Light Up Stage, multiple burn spells, many Manamorphoses. And what this ended up what this turned out to be is that we had a lot of removal spells, we had a lot of Thought Seizes, stuff like that. And then just, of course, what does our opponent do? Well, they just top deck the Bedlam Reveler, and then they just draw a bunch of cards, and then from the Bedlam Reveler comes another Sprite Dragon, another Stormwing entity, and then a Monastery Swiftspear. And literally at this point in the game, I think earlier, this was day 25, so this is towards the end of the challenge, but earlier in the challenge, I think I literally probably would just right-click concede and been so pissed. My opponent always tops like Bedlam Reveler. This is so dumb. Like, this is ridiculous. Like, this MTGO is a joke. Like, you just play because this is like playing at a casino, blah, blah, right? But of course, guess what happens? Our opponent spews out their hand, but look what they don't have. This is really important. They don't have any Lava Darts in the graveyard to give prowess triggers to their creatures. And on top of that, they don't have any more cards in hand. This is their hand, just creatures. And they spew this out on the board, they pause, and they realize, I'm at 5 life, they have no way to give prowess triggers, and I have a Death Shadow on the board. So they can't attack with that Sprite Dragon, can they? Because if they attack with that Sprite Dragon, that makes a Shadow a 10-10, and then a Temur Battle Rage is for sure going to kill them. But guess what happens anyway? We top deck the Battle Rage on the next turn, we just kill them anyway. They make the right move, and they don't attack, but I drew the I think we may have had the Battle Rage in hand, but we didn't have enough life loss, so I think we top decked the Street Wraith. And so we literally just untap and I just went straight to combat, attack with both. And our opponent lined up blocks, and they were blocks that did not save them from Temur Battle Rage. Battle Rage the Shadow won the game. I mean, this is just like one of those examples where, like, in terms of like metrics of board presence, land drops, spells seen, value generators, we've lost this game on every metric except for the one that most matters, which is our opponent's life total, which gets reduced to 0 in the next turn. All right, next one. Really, really similar occurrence here, okay? And as we can see, our opponent has been able to, this is turn 4, so I think they went turn 3 Stormwing Entity, turn 4 Stormwing Entity, which again is like such a punch in the gut, feel bad, right? We've gone through 2 Fatal Pushes and a Lightning Bolt to have to answer a Skullscar Mage and a Monastery Swiftspear, and also to try to answer another threat. And with this board state, as you can see, are we really, really winning this game? Well, no, because we're at 8 life, and our opponent has 2 3/3 flyers with prowess, and, excuse me, they have a Soulscar Mage, which can shrink our creatures. This is a very dire situation. Now, it was dire until our opponent decided to attack us. And as you can see here, they decided to attack with the Stormwing Entity. And when they attacked, I thought we were dead. I thought something bad was going to happen. But it's funny because when you look at this, I thought something like Mutagenic Growth, but actually Mutagenic Growth only puts us to 1 here. But I still was like, okay, they're just attacking. They're going to put us to 4 or whatever. We're probably dead. They probably have something in hand that makes it dead. Well, no, they didn't. They just attack with that, didn't do anything else. They put us to 4. And guess what? We got put to 4. We got to untap with this Battle Rage in our hand and win. So right before this, they made this attack. And then as they were making the attack, frankly, because I wasn't really thinking too straight, I thought we were dead for sure. But they didn't deal us lethal damage. We untap in Battle Rage and we got to kill them. So just another example of don't give up. Like no matter how dire the board state looks, like this kind of scenario comes up and it comes up a lot for you to win the game. All right, this is another great example. This was on day 26 of our day 26, and we were playing Grixis Death Shadow. This is when we started putting lightning bolts into our Grixis Death Shadow decks, which, by the way, I think was like a massive, massive level up for our Grixis Shadow decks, is like playing 4 lightning bolts here. Okay, can we just look at this board state? Can we just look how like absolutely pitifully hopeless this looks? Our opponent has 2 Scavenging Oozes, an Elemental Token, a Seasoned Pyro, a Bloodbraid Elf, an Arbor Elf, and in hand we have the reveal window popped open, and in hand they have a Glorybringer. And a Glorybringer they kind of been sandbagging because I think we showed them either Ether Gust or Mana Leak in the previous game, I think, and so they were kind of playing around that. I mean, this looks horrible, right? And I think in our hand we had something like 2 bolts and a Battle Rage, something like that, and we didn't even have a red source at this point in the game. Okay, so really funny thing happens. The next turn, our opponent untaps, and then they put a Blood Moon on the stack. I almost go to counter it, but then I just say nah, and I just let the Blood Moon resolve. And because guess what it did? It turned on our Lightning Bolts, and then we get to go bolt a Scavenging Ooze, bolt the other Scavenging Ooze, and actually put our opponent into a losing position. Now, ultimately, we lost this game, unfortunately. But we lost this game because our opponent, we had them dead on board because we had a Battle Rage in hand with a huge Death Shadow. We had them dead on board, and they top deck. Guess what they top deck? A Seasoned Pyromancer. They land the Seasoned Pyromancer. Guess what they draw? Bolt, Bolt. They literally had to go Pyromancer into running Bolt, Bolt in order to kill us because we had them dead on board otherwise from this board state. Like, look at this board state. I mean, how are you supposed to ever conceive of a win here? But I think, again, it just goes to that idea. Just never give up. And don't let because I think like when you're playing, this is a little bit scary, right? But you just don't let the fear, or I don't know if fear is the right word. That sounds dramatic. I guess it's fear for me because I get anxiety playing this game sometimes. But I guess like don't let that element, phase you or make you or like lead you to making worse decisions. Because like basically what it comes down to is board states like this are basically like, yeah, maybe you're like 5% to win. But guess what happens if you say I am not winning anyway, this sucks, get pissed and then start playing bad, you're going to take that 5% to win to 0%. And I think the way that we steal wins with Death Shadow, the way that we're able to stay relevant in the metagame, where we're able to get a good win rate, is if we don't ever give up and fight for that 5% chance of still winning. Okay, this last example I think is one of my favorite examples of Death Shadow. Okay, so I think even the best players in the game mess up Shadow Math. And so if even the best players do it, shoot, everyone does it. Okay, myself especially. I mess up Shadow Math all the time. Okay, I've played a lot of Death Shadow after these past 30 days, and I still left myself dead because I was just being an idiot about Shadow Math. But here was an example where, as we can see in our hands, a Fatal Push and a Monastery Swift Spear. We've attacked with our with a Death Shadow and a Monastery Swift Spear the turn before. Sorry, and here our opponent top decks the Primeval Titan. We know they have a Dryad of the Illusion Grove in hand, and they attack with Primeval Titan with the Amulet of Vigor out on the board. Looking pretty rough for us, and in fact, almost looking dire and hopeless. Because as you can see, we have no easy way to turn on Revolt. So next turn, even if our opponent didn't attack here, they just untap and just play Dryad attacked. With the Valakut on the board there, they were certainly going to be able to kill us. All right, so our opponent goes to attacks. I'm ready to give up. I'm like, this is so dumb, of course, the typical thing, right? Oh, M2GO, my Amulet player, opponent top deck the win. How do the Amulet players always top deck prime time? It's like they have 50, 100, lands in their deck, blah, blah. You do this, everyone does that, right? But my opponent goes to attacks. I'm feeling that way inside. But luckily, Mike was on the call with this, and he's like, dude, no, just don't concede. Let's think about this. My first instinct here was to say no blocks and go to 1, because my feeling was, because they're attacking with an 8/6 primetime, because they got it boosted up by the +2/+0 haste land, and I was like, we'll go to 1, I guess, and then we force a block with a Death Shadow. It was not a good plan. I wasn't thinking too straight. Because here's what I was thinking in my head. I was saying, well, if I put this in front of the prime time has trample, and I'm just assuming my opponent is going to assign all the trample damage to the Death Shadow, kill the Death Shadow, pass the turn, and now what do we have? We're at 9 life. We have a 4/4 Shadow, a 1/2 Monastery Swiftspear, and all they got to do is next turn just play the Dryad and then attack with the prime time. So for all those reasons that were going on in my head, I thought we were 100% dead. But Mike said, no, just go ahead and put on a block. Put a block there. And I kept telling him, I was like, no, dude, like, I'm sure this player knows what's up. Like, I'm sure they're going to assign all the damage to the Shadow, not trample over onto me for any damage to leave the Shadow living. He's like, no, you got this. You got this. Just block. So I was like, okay, whatever. I'll block. It felt like the cheesy way to do it, right? I was like, what? They're just going to assign all the damage to the Shadow. Like, what are you talking about? But then they don't. Because MTGO auto prompts you, because so the Shadow's a 4/4, and then the prime time's an 8/6. So MTGO automatically assigns 4 damage to Shadow, 4 damage to me. And intuitively for us Magic players, we think, oh yeah, that'll kill the Shadow. They'll kill the creature that's blocking, but it doesn't. And instead we take 4 damage, go to 5, and then we're left with an 8/8 Death Shadow that didn't die. And you can tell the way our opponent played because they kind of had a pause for a second before they kept going, where I think they expected that to happen. And then we untap, we draw a Thoughtseize, so we get to go Swiftspear, Thoughtseize, take the Dryad, attack, and at that point we are forcing chumps on both Death Shadows, because now both Death Shadows are 11/11s. We go to 2 life at that point. And then from there, our opponent takes a draw step and concedes. Like, absolutely crazy. Just like a game that we should have lost. All our opponent had to do was assign all the damage to that Death Shadow, and I don't think we were winning from that point. I mean, obviously, we still had top decks and stuff, you know, of course, Team of Battle Rage or Street Wraith into something, or, you know, whatever. Oh, no, this was a Lurrus deck, so no Street Wraith shenanigans there. But this was definitely one of those moments where I was like, wow, that is pretty crazy. Like, that actually kind of worked. Okay. This comes from early on. This is a day number 4. And this has a little bit less to doing with giving up and more just saying, like, how do I keep myself in the right Shadow mindset? Okay. And I think that goes in part with never giving up playing the Death Shadow deck, because I think a lot of what you have to remember playing a Shadow deck is that ultimately you are an aggressive deck. You are a deck that's you're not a control deck. You're not a Boomer Jun mid-range deck. I mean, you're a deck that kills people and tries to kill them fast. And I think getting yourselves consistently in the mindset where you can just always say, I'm going to put the ball in your court. You know, I'm going to make you have it. I'm going to make you do something here about this. So here's the situation. I think this comes up in a really, really big way. Our opponent has the Egon, God of Death, which is a 3-mana 6/6 Death Touch. And so at this point, I'm thinking, like, oh, God, like, we don't have a Fatal Push to kill it. We don't have Revolts, blah, blah. And I have double Dismember, but Dismember doesn't kill an Egon, and I'm just kind of running through all these things in my head. Basically, I'm in the mindset of a Jun player, right? Like, I'm in the mindset of a person who's trying to imagine, how do we beat this threat from our opponent? How do we answer this threat from our opponent and still be able to stay up on resources, be able to stay up in that competing, that area of the game? But instead, what Mike suggests, and was something that honestly had a huge level up moment for me here, was just to say, well, you can just present lethal on this board. Not this turn, but the following turn. And just force your opponent to draw into it. And as you can see, it's a good idea because we know 2 cards in their hand. We know they have a Embercleave and a Sunbaked Canyon unknown in hand. So they have an unknown in hand and they're drawing into a 4th card. Do you want to just gamble on one of those not being a removal spell, or a removal spell that can answer a Scourge? As honestly was brilliant. And so what we do is, it felt like the wrong play because of my experience playing, these mid-rangey, dirtily decks. But we went double Dismember on the Egon, bolt them to put them to 14, attack with now our 6/6 Scourge to put them down to 8. Now our Scourge is a 12/12, presenting lethal. And now we say, now you have to answer us, opponent. And that was such a powerful mind shift for me to go into instead of being on the back foot, being defensive, thinking, how do I answer everything, to how do I make my opponents realize that they're dead unless they top deck or draw into something, was really, really huge. So I think that has a lot to do with the never giving up mindset. It's the never lose sight of how you're going to kill your opponent at all times in the game. And if that means, firing off 3 cards in your hand, whatever, 3-for-1ing yourself to kill your opponent's creature, well, who cares if you're reducing your opponent's life total to 0? I think it was Jeff Hooglin who said it. He said it very brilliantly. The best kind of card advantage is the card advantage you get when your opponent dies with a handful of cards. So this is a really, really cool moment, and I think a really big level up moment for me, really thinking about this. Also, of course, a level up moment realizing that Scourge of the Skyclades is a really ridiculous Magic card, too. Cool. All right, so that was kind of my overview of the things that I learned. Now we can just kind of delve into some of the more fun things, like my favorite deck out of all of the days, and it was definitely had to be Day 20 meme deck, Crox's Bouncy Castle. We got the 4-1, had a shot at maybe getting a 5-0 with it. It was pretty fun. This deck was a blast to play. It was so much fun. We get to combine fun things like Lightning Skelemental, Croxa, and Dreadhorde Arcanist, which recently just got the Banhammer in Legacy. So you got to figure maybe it has potential to be really, really good in Modern. I don't know. Maybe there's not enough one-drop instant or sorceries that are good enough. But still, this deck was a blast to play. I had so much fun. We got to do wild things like, against our blue-white opponent, cast a Croxa, and then unearth it, and then claim it back to just make them discard 3 cards out of their hand, and then make them lose a bunch of life. It was just wonderful. So definitely, this definitely had to be my favorite, most fun deck played out of the entire challenge. All right, no surprise to anyone, this is my pick for grinding leagues, the Rakdos Shadow list. Just such an amazingly consistent and aggressive deck. Now, I don't know if I'd recommend this deck for a big tournament because Heliod is everywhere in the top tables right now. And I think this deck does struggle immensely against Heliod because this deck is first and foremost a Scourge of the Skyclaves deck. And when your opponent is making Scourge of the Skyclaves really bad with just almost mono life gain out of your opponent, this becomes a much, much worse deck. But that being said, when you play in those leagues, for anyone who's grinding leagues out there, you know that there's not a lot of Heliod in the leagues, despite Heliod being everywhere in the top tables of premier events. This is a fantastic deck to grind leagues with. Just, like I said, just extremely linear, super powerful. And also, if your opponent's playing fast, then you can really fly through leagues pretty quickly with this deck. There are so many turn 4 kills in this deck, whether they put it together through prowess triggers on the Swift Spear, that the famous turn 2 Scourge of the Skyclaves and untap and just, Battle Rage and Bolt for the win, that kind of stuff. But really, really cool deck. Highly recommend this if you're just looking to just maybe grind up trophies, to try to grind up QPs for a big event. Just a fantastic deck to take out in the leagues right now. All right, and that brings me to my deck I bring to F&M. When Paper returns, whew, God bless the day when Paper returns. I cannot wait to play in Paper again. But definitely the just wild memes abound Jund Traverse list. The Jund list that I really, really love, where you get to play Street Race and Baubles to try to maximize your Traverse the Uvenwald. You get to pack a lot of wacky Traverse targets like Bloodbraid Elf Valeris and Goreclan Rampager. Get to play a Tarfire, or probably Seal of Fire is actually honestly better in a Luris deck. And then the Ren and 6s, which were probably nonsense, probably be better to put something else in there, maybe even like a Scourge of the Skyclaves, but still, you get to live the dream of playing a almost entirely souped-up Tarmogoyf. I think you can make a 7-8 Tarmogoyf for this deck alone if you like Thoughtseize your own Ren and 6 or something like that. Really, really fun. I absolutely have a blast playing this deck. Yeah. All right, that brings me to my final slide. Moving forward, what's next? Well, I'm really actually not 100% sure. And kind of something that I alluded to earlier in my admiration and my joy of playing against Amulet Titan, I thought about, maybe I could do a 30 days of Amulet. So I went and looked up some videos about Amulet. I started watching things about it. I started playing some practice games with the deck. It is really, really not my cup of tea. Now, that's not to say I would never play the deck or I would never take it to tournament, nothing like that, but to play 30 days of something, I'm not going to lie to you guys, you have to have, the deck has to be somewhat enjoyable to you because you get sick of playing Death Shadows 30 days in a row. And I think that I worry that if I were to commit myself to 30 days of Amulet Titan, that I might get really sick of playing that same deck for 30 days straight because it doesn't really spark me. It doesn't really spark joy in me the way that the other decks do. And on top of that, with Amulet, it's a little bit harder because Amulet pretty much has very similar builds to it. So what was really fun about these 30 days of Death Shadows, we could play a different archetype each day and keep things kind of fresh. But I don't think Amulet would have quite the same freshness to it, so I don't know. So that's why I want to throw it to you, anyone who's watching this. Do you have any ideas for a challenge? My good friend Ian suggested 30 days of Thoughtseize, which sounds a little bit maybe too similar to 30 Days of Death Shadow, but it still is would be really fun. Of course, Thoughtseize is probably my favorite card of all time, so I would not turn down a 30 Days of Thoughtseize kind of challenge. Should I put out random videos? What do y'all think? I could just do one-off Jund videos. I mean, I could just go back to Old Reliable. I mean, It's funny now that the challenge is over. I think I've already played 4 leagues of Jund already, so I could just start uploading my Jund leagues. I don't know if people would be interested in that. There's already a ton of Jund content out there, and that's why I'm kind of reluctant to upload. Or do I take a break from YouTube? You know, there's a potential chance that I just want to take a break and just maybe come back when I feel like it. I don't know. Whatever I decide to do, though, I'm definitely committing to making some changes, and I've had a lot of people leave comments for me about this. But yes, I will definitely try to get better audio quality. I have a pretty cheap microphone that I use because it was not very expensive, and it was just something that I had lying around. I would most certainly invest in something like a Blue Yeti. I've heard a lot of good things from friends about that one. So especially for our purposes of just simple, commentating on games. And then I will most definitely, and I've already done the research. I've already found it. I reached out to another friend of mine who's a video production manager, and so he already has sent me a video editing software. I will edit out all the dead air from the videos. Thank you so much to everyone who was patient and sat through my other videos where there was literally just a minute and a half of me just kind of sitting there silently, or when we're waiting for our opponents to take game action, stuff like that. So I'll most certainly be condensing my videos. They won't be so long. I'll edit out some of that dead air. But yeah, otherwise, that's my wrap up. If you're still watching, thank you so much for hanging out. It's like I said, the support and the comments and the interaction has just really made it wonderful. Really made it worth doing this challenge. And yeah, I think that's about all I have. I will see everyone when I see you, and thank you again. Have a good one.